Even though it's a children's saga, Toy Story had several confirmed deaths, and some of them were actually quite brutal. So today we're going to look at the worst deaths in the entire Toy Story saga, as well as several characters who disappeared and most likely weren't still alive by Toy Story 5 either. Combat Carl. Throughout Toy Story, we've seen several versions of Combat Carl. The most well-known is probably the one that appeared in Toy Story of Terror, but the first Combat Carl we saw had a completely different story. In the first Toy Story movie from 1995, Sid Phillips ties a rocket to Combat Carl's back, lights it, and blows him into 1,000 pieces. The movie only shows us the explosion, and after that, we never see that Combat Carl again. So this was the first confirmed death in the entire franchise. The fly that died on Buzz's visor. In this same movie, there's another death that lasts less than a second and almost no one remembers. After Woody throws Buzz out the window, Buzz manages to get into Andy's mom's car to chase him and get revenge. But when he comes in through the sunroof, we can see that the fly crashed into the visor of his helmet and got completely squashed. And yes, it's dead because even its guts came out. Basically, Buzz's helmet ended up working like a car windshield. Buster! Do you remember Buster? The dachshund that Andy got as a Christmas present at the end of the first movie? At that point, Buster was probably around 3 months old. In Toy Story 2, we already saw him as an adult dog, about 2 years old. But by Toy Story 3, he was already a senior dog. He had trouble walking, had gained quite a bit of weight, and was probably around 12 years old. In Toy Story 4, he didn't appear because he stayed living with Andy's mom. But by then, Buster should have been about 13 years old. That means that for Toy Story 5, Buster would be nearing 15. A dachshund usually lives between 12 and 16 years. This depends on its size and the care it receives. And taking into account the condition we saw Buster in since Toy Story 3, it's most likely that by Toy Story 5, he would have already passed away. So leave your like and your comment on behalf of Andy's loyal friend, Scott, Sid's dog. And if Buster probably already died, the one who definitely didn't make it to Toy Story 5 was Scott, Sid Phillips' dog. Scott was already an adult dog since the first movie. We don't know exactly how old he was, but even if he was only 2 or 3 by Toy Story 5, he would already be around 17 or 18 years old. So Scott would also have been long dead from old age way before the 5th movie even started. The toys that Sid Phillips destroyed. But dogs weren't the only victims related to Sid Phillips. Sid didn't just mistreat his toys. The boy entertained himself by performing operations, swapping their heads, tearing off parts, and putting together the remains of several toys to build a new one. One of the clearest examples is Janie, his sister Hannah's doll. Sid takes off her head and swaps it with that of a pterodactyl as part of what he calls a double brain transplant. But Janie and the pterodactyl didn't die. Later on, the mutant toys put their heads back on the correct bodies and both of them take part in the plan to save Woody and Buzz. The same thing happens with Babyface, Ducky, Legs, Roller Bob, and the other mutant toys. Even though they're missing parts and are built from pieces of other toys, they're all still alive. In fact, they're the ones who help repair Sid's most recent victims. The ones that do seem to have ended up dead are the ones completely taken apart in his room. On Sid's lamp, we can see several doll heads separated from their bodies. They never move or help the others, and they also don't reappear when all the toys rise up against Sid. So, while the mutant toys managed to survive with new parts, those dolls on the lamp were probably other victims of Sid's operations that could no longer be repaired. Sid Phillips. And since we're talking so much about Sid Phillips, we have to mention the death that many believe Pixar hid in Coco. In Toy Story 3, we see Sid again working as a garbage collector. We know it's him because he still wears the same black t-shirt with a skull that he had when he was a kid. He also has longer hair, headphones, and he's making music with the trash cans. Years later in Coco, a musician appears in the land of the dead wearing a shirt with exactly the same skull as Sid's. He also has long hair. And Pixar never said that was Sid, so the shirt could also just be a reference. But because of the clothes, the hair, and the connection both characters have with music, people came up with the theory that Sid Phillips died sometime after Toy Story 3 and ended up appearing as a skeleton in Coco. So it's not a confirmed death, but if this character from Coco really is Sid, at least we know he dedicated himself to music and not to being a serial killer. Wheezy in Toy Story 2, we met Wheezy, the penguin who pretty much started the whole movie. At first, he was really sad because his whistle didn't work anymore, and he knew Andy's mom was going to sell him at the yard sale. Woody manages to rescue him, Andy fixes him, and in the end, it seems like everything turned out well for him, but in Toy Story 3 we never saw him again. He didn't appear in the 4th or 5th movie either. So, what happened to Wheezy? Because of his shape and the sound he made, Wheezy was one of those squeaky dog toys. One of the theories is that he ended up at another yard sale, someone bought him as a toy for their pet, and their dog ended up destroying him. Maybe it wasn't Buster, but after so many years and with how fragile he already was since Toy Story 2, it's very unlikely that Wheezy would have survived until the 5th movie. What do you think happened to him? Gary, do you remember Gary? The old man who fixed Woody in Toy Story 2. Well, as a fun fact, he's the same old man who stars in the Pixar short Gary's Game, where he plays a game of chess against himself. When he appeared in Toy Story 2, Gary already seemed to be between 65 and 70 years old. If we take into account the years that pass until Toy Story 5 by then, he would already be reaching or might have even passed 80. Also, in Toy Story 4, a photograph of him appears behind the counter of the antique store. This made many people think that Margaret, the owner of the store, could be his wife, and that Gary had worked there restoring objects before he died. The photograph doesn't confirm that he died, but it does make it clear that Gary had some connection to the store, and because of his age, it's very likely that by Toy Story 5, he had already passed away, and that the photo was one of the mementos he left behind in the store. The fake death of Zorg. We also have Zorg's supposed death in Toy Story 2, although here we need to clarify exactly what happened. During the fight in the elevator, Rex accidentally hits Zorg and makes him fall from a great height. For a few minutes, the movie wants us to think he died, but later we find out that he's still alive and comes back with the "I am your father" joke. There was originally a version where Zorg died, but it was considered too dark for the audience, so they changed it. We changed Andy's dad. Many people have wondered why Andy never had a dad present in any of the movies. For years, there was a story going around that Andy's dad was the original owner of Woody. According to that version, he got sick with polio when he was a child, kept Woody his whole life, and before he died, he gave him to his son. The theory became very popular because it was supposedly told by Joe Ranft, one of Pixar's screenwriters. However, Andrew Stanton, who also wrote the first movie, said that the story was a complete lie. So Andy's dad's death from polio is not part of the official story. But Pixar hasn't explained what really happened to him either. So many still believe he died before the events of the first movie. Sammy Salamander. In Toy Story 5, we met Sammy Salamander, Bonnie's pet. But when Woody asks if it's the same Sammy he knew from the other toys, they explain that it's actually Sammy Salamander number 2. Sammy Salamander number 1 died before the movie started. That's another confirmed death within the saga. Later on, when the toys discover that their plastic hands don't work on Lily Lilliput's screen, they grab Sammy number 2 and use one of his legs to control it, but then they let him go and Sammy escapes into the vegetation. Sammy number 2 doesn't die in that scene. The last thing we see is that he managed to escape. However, during the credits, a Sammy Salamander number 3 appears. This doesn't confirm that the second one died. So, the most logical thing is that Bonnie was never able to recover him after he escaped and simply replaced him with another one. But anyway, in a very short time, Bonnie had already lost 2 different salamanders. And considering that a salamander can live from 5 to 30 years when well cared for, that tells you that Bonnie is a terrible pet owner. The death of Buzz on Game Boy Color. And to finish, we have an honorable mention that not everyone knows about. In the Toy Story 2 video game for Game Boy Color, when the player loses all their lives, an animation appears showing Buzz lying on the ground along with 2 batteries. The game itself explains that Buzz ran out of energy. His body is completely collapsed and he can't move anymore. So basically, it shows us what his death would be like if his batteries ever ran out for good. Obviously, it's not an official death in the movies, but it is one of the few times the franchise has directly shown us how Buzz Lightyear could die. And now tell me, which of these deaths had you not noticed? And which other character do you think didn't make it to Toy Story 5 alive?